The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Windsor Castle as Princess Charlotte walked alongside her governess through the historic courtyard. At just 8 years old, the young princess had developed a keen eye for observing the world around her, a trait that often surprised the adults in her life. Her bright blue eyes, inherited from her father, Prince William, seemed to take in every detail of the ancient fortress that had been home to British royalty for nearly 1,000 years. Charlotte had always been fascinated by the royal guards who stood sentinel at various points throughout the castle grounds. These magnificent soldiers, dressed in their iconic red tunics and towering black bearskin hats, represented centuries of tradition and unwavering dedication to the crown. She had learned from her history lessons that these guards were not merely ceremonial figures but highly trained military personnel who took their duties with utmost seriousness. On this particular Tuesday morning, Charlotte noticed something unusual happening near the main entrance to the state apartments. A small crowd of tourists had gathered around one of the royal guards, and their behavior seemed different from the usual respectful distance most visitors maintained. The guard, a young man who couldn't have been much older than 25, stood perfectly still in his traditional position, his rifle held at the precise angle required by centuries of military protocol. What caught Charlotte's attention wasn't the guard himself, but the group of teenagers who had positioned themselves directly in front of him. They were laughing loudly and making exaggerated faces, clearly trying to get some sort of reaction from the stoic soldier. One of the boys stepped closer than appropriate, waving his hands dramatically while his friends recorded everything on their mobile phones. Another teenager began making silly sounds and gestures, apparently thinking it was hilarious to try to break the guard's concentration. Charlotte watched from a distance as the situation escalated. The teenagers seemed to be taking turns seeing who could come up with the most outrageous behavior to test the guard's legendary composure. They had no understanding of the deep respect and discipline required to maintain such stillness and focus, especially when faced with deliberate provocation. The Royal Guard's training demanded that he remain motionless and silent regardless of what happened around him, unless there was a genuine security threat. The young princess felt something stir within her as she observed this disrespectful display. These visitors clearly didn't understand that the guard was a real person with feelings, someone who had dedicated his life to serving the crown and protecting the royal family. They saw him as nothing more than a living statue, an entertainment object for their amusement. Charlotte could see the slight tension in the guard's jaw, the only indication that he was aware of what was happening and struggling to maintain his professional composure. Her governess, Miss Sarah, noticed Charlotte had stopped walking and was staring intently at the scene unfolding near the entrance. "Come along, Your Royal Highness," she said gently, assuming the young princess was simply curious about the tourists. "We mustn't be late for your French lesson." But Charlotte didn't move. Something about the situation felt deeply wrong to her, and she couldn't simply walk away. The teenagers had now attracted the attention of other visitors, some of whom were joining in with the inappropriate behavior, while others looked on with obvious disapproval. The guard remained perfectly still, his eyes fixed straight ahead, but Charlotte could sense his discomfort. She had grown up around these dedicated soldiers and had developed a deep appreciation for their service and sacrifice. Her parents had taught her to always treat everyone with dignity and respect, regardless of their position or role. As she stood there watching, Charlotte began to feel a growing sense of indignation. This brave soldier who had sworn to protect her family and serve his country deserved so much better than this treatment. He was someone's son, perhaps someone's brother, and he was being humiliated for the entertainment of people who had no understanding of honor or duty. The young princess realized that someone needed to intervene, and surprisingly, she felt that someone might just be her. Miss Sarah noticed the determined expression that had appeared on Charlotte's face, an expression that was becoming increasingly familiar to those who knew the spirited young royal. It was the same look she had worn when she decided to help an injured bird in the palace gardens, or when she had insisted on personally thanking every member of the kitchen staff during a recent state dinner. When Princess Charlotte set her mind to something, She possessed a remarkable determination that often surprised adults with its intensity and clarity of purpose. Without saying a word to her governess, Princess Charlotte began walking toward the commotion with purposeful steps that belied her young age. Miss Sarah called after her softly, uncertain whether she should physically stop the princess or simply follow at a discreet distance. Charlotte had always been known for her independent spirit, but this level of determination was something new, even for her. As Charlotte approached the group, she could hear the teenagers more clearly. They were speaking in a mixture of languages, apparently tourists from different countries who had bonded over their shared mission to break the guard's stoic facade. One girl was making loud kissing sounds while another boy was pretending to march in an exaggerated military style, mocking the precision and discipline that the guard represented. The Royal Guard, whose name tag read Williams, had been on duty for nearly 2 hours. He had endured rain, harsh sunlight, and now this sustained harassment with the same unwavering professionalism. His military training had prepared him for many challenges, but dealing with disrespectful tourists while maintaining complete stillness required a special kind of mental fortitude. He focused on his breathing and tried to think of something pleasant to distract himself from the increasingly aggressive behavior of the crowd. Charlotte positioned herself at the edge of the group, carefully observing the situation. She was small enough that the teenagers initially didn't notice her presence, which gave her time to assess exactly what was happening. The young princess had inherited not only her father's eyes, but also his ability to read people and situations quickly. She could see that the guard was struggling despite his professional exterior, and she knew that something needed to be done immediately. The crowd had grown larger, with some adults now stopping to watch the spectacle. Most seemed uncomfortable with what they were witnessing, but nobody was stepping forward to intervene. This was the moment Charlotte realized that sometimes being a princess wasn't just about wearing pretty dresses and attending formal events. Sometimes it meant using her position to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Taking a deep breath, Charlotte stepped forward into the center of the group. Her small voice cut through the laughter and noise with surprising clarity. "Excuse me," she said politely but firmly, "but what you're doing isn't very nice." The teenagers paused, surprised to hear a child's voice, and turned to look at the serious-faced little girl who had suddenly appeared among them. One of the older boys, clearly the ringleader of the group, laughed dismissively. "It's just a bit of fun, little girl," he said in accented English. "We're not hurting anyone. He's just standing there anyway." The boy gestured toward the guard as if he were an inanimate object, rather than a living person with feelings and dignity. Charlotte looked directly at the teenager, her blue eyes steady and unwavering. "He's not just standing there," she replied with the kind of quiet authority that seemed beyond her years. "He's doing his job, which is very important. He's protecting people, including you." Her voice carried across the courtyard, and several adults nearby began to pay closer attention to what was happening. The girl who had been making kissing sounds rolled her eyes. "Oh, please, it's not like he's actually doing anything dangerous. He's just there for tourists to look at." She pulled out her phone again and aimed it at the guard, preparing to resume her disruptive behavior. But Charlotte stepped directly into her line of sight, blocking the shot. "You wouldn't like it if someone came to where you work or go to school and made fun of you while you were trying to do your best," Charlotte said, her voice remaining calm but growing stronger. "This soldier works very hard and he deserves respect." The simple truth of her words seemed to hang in the air, creating an uncomfortable silence among the group. Miss Sarah watched from several yards away, torn between admiration for her young charge's courage and concern about the situation, potentially escalating. She had never seen Princess Charlotte take such a direct stand against adults before, but she recognized the same strength of character that ran through the entire royal family. The governess decided to trust Charlotte's instincts and remained at a distance, ready to intervene if necessary, but allowing the young princess to handle the situation herself. The royal guard, despite his training to remain completely focused ahead, couldn't help but notice the small voice defending him. He had been preparing himself to endure another hour of harassment, but suddenly there was this brave child standing up for him. The unexpected kindness touched something deep within him. though his professional training prevented him from showing any outward reaction. The teenage ringleader looked down at Charlotte with a mixture of annoyance and curiosity. He hadn't expected to be challenged by someone so young, especially someone who spoke with such confidence and conviction. "And who exactly are you to tell us what to do?" he asked, crossing his arms defensively. His friends gathered closer around him, creating an intimidating circle around the small princess. Charlotte stood her ground, showing no signs of being intimidated by the group of teenagers who towered over her. "I'm someone who believes in treating people with kindness and respect," she replied simply. "And right now you're being mean to someone who can't defend himself because he's doing his job." Her words were spoken with such genuine sincerity that even the most cynical members of the group began to look uncomfortable. An older woman who had been watching from nearby stepped closer, drawn by the unusual sight of a young child confronting a group of unruly teenagers. She recognized something special about the little girl's bearing and the way she carried herself with such natural dignity. The woman began to wonder if this might be someone important, though she couldn't quite place why the child seemed familiar. One of the teenage girls tried a different approach, crouching down to Charlotte's eye level. "Look, sweetie, we're not really hurting anyone. These guards are used to this kind of thing. It's practically part of their job to deal with tourists." She spoke in a patronizing tone that made it clear she thought Charlotte was too young to understand the situation. Charlotte's response surprised everyone. Actually, their job is to protect the royal family and maintain security at the palace. Dealing with rude behavior isn't part of their job description. It's just something they have to put up with because they're professionals. Her knowledge of the guard's actual duties made it clear that she wasn't just a random child who had wandered into the situation. The royal guard, still maintaining his rigid posture, was amazed by the young girl's accurate understanding of his role. Most people, including many adults, had no idea what his actual responsibilities entailed. They saw the ceremonial uniform and assumed he was purely decorative, not realizing that he was a highly trained soldier, ready to respond to any genuine threat at a moment's notice. More adults had begun to gather around the scene, drawn by the unusual confrontation between the small child and the group of teenagers. Some were taking photos and videos, though their focus had shifted from the guard to the remarkable little girl who was fearlessly standing up to people much larger than herself. Word began to spread through the crowd that something extraordinary was happening. Charlotte noticed that the teenagers were beginning to look uncertain. Their confidence was wavering under her steady gaze and the growing attention from other tourists. She decided to try a different approach, appealing to their better nature rather than simply criticizing their behavior. "I bet you're really nice people most of the time," she said, looking at each of them in turn. "And I bet you have jobs or go to school where you work hard and want people to respect you." The teenage girl who had crouched down earlier stood up slowly, looking thoughtful. Charlotte's words had struck a chord with her. She worked part-time at a restaurant back home and knew how awful it felt when customers treated her badly. She had never really thought about the guard as a person with feelings before, but the little girl's words were making her reconsider her actions. "Maybe we could take some nice photos instead," Charlotte suggested hopefully. "You could stand next to the guard respectfully and take pictures that way. He's really quite handsome in his uniform, and it would make much better photos than trying to make him break his concentration." Her suggestion offered the teenagers a way to save face while changing their behavior. The ringleader looked around at his friends, noticing that their enthusiasm for the harassment had clearly diminished. The presence of this articulate child had somehow changed the entire dynamic of the situation. What had seemed like harmless fun a few minutes earlier now felt petty and mean-spirited under her innocent but penetrating gaze. Miss Sarah watched, with growing pride as Charlotte handled the delicate situation with wisdom far beyond her years. The governess had seen the young princess interact with world leaders and diplomats, but this was different. This was Charlotte choosing to use her natural authority to protect someone who needed help without any prompting or guidance from adults. Middle-aged man in the crowd suddenly gasped, recognition dawning on his face. He whispered urgently to his wife, pointing discreetly at Charlotte. The woman's eyes widened as she realized who they were witnessing in action. Word began to spread, quietly through the gathering crowd that this wasn't just any child confronting the teenagers, but Princess Charlotte herself. As whispers of recognition rippled through the crowd, the atmosphere around the confrontation began to shift dramatically. The teenagers, initially unaware of Charlotte's identity, started to notice the changed behavior of the adults around them. People were holding their phones more discreetly, speaking in hushed, reverent tones and looking at the little girl with expressions of awe and respect. The teenage ringleader caught fragments of whispered conversations and began to piece together what was happening. His face grew pale as the realization dawned that he had been arguing with a member of the British royal family. The girl who had been crouched down earlier covered her mouth with her hands, horrified at how she had spoken to a princess. The entire group began to understand that they weren't just dealing with a precocious child, but with someone whose family lived in the very castle they were visiting. Charlotte, however, seemed completely unfazed by the growing recognition. She continued to focus entirely on the situation at hand, showing no sign that she expected to be treated differently because of her royal status. This genuine humility only served to increase the crowd's admiration for the young princess. Here was a child who could have simply ordered the teenagers to stop or called for security, but instead had chosen to appeal to their humanity. One of the teenage boys, overcome with embarrassment, immediately stepped forward and bowed awkwardly. "Your Royal Highness, we're so sorry," he stammered, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. "We didn't know. We wouldn't have." He struggled to find words adequate to express his mortification at the situation. Charlotte smiled kindly at the boy, her expression warm and forgiving. "You don't need to call me that," she said gently, "and you don't need to bow. I just wanted you to understand that this guard is a real person who deserves to be treated nicely." Her gracious response to their obvious distress showed a maturity and compassion that left many of the adult observers deeply moved. The girl who had been making inappropriate sounds earlier began to cry, overwhelmed by shame and the kindness Charlotte was showing despite their terrible behavior. "We're horrible people," she whispered. "We were so rude to him and to you." She looked toward the royal guard with genuine remorse, finally seeing him as a human being rather than an object for entertainment. "You're not horrible people," Charlotte replied firmly. "You just made a mistake, and now you can make it right." She gestured toward the guard who continued to maintain his professional posture despite the extraordinary scene unfolding around him. "Maybe you could apologize to him. Even though he can't respond while he's on duty, I'm sure he would appreciate knowing that you understand what you did wrong." The transformation in the teenagers was remarkable to witness. Led by the girl who had been crying, they approached the royal guard with genuine respect and humility. Each of them offered sincere apologies for their behavior, speaking quietly and respectfully. Though the guard couldn't acknowledge their words directly, it was clear from the slight relaxation in his shoulders that he heard and appreciated their change of heart. The crowd that had gathered to watch the spectacle had grown considerably, but the mood had completely changed from entertainment to reverence. People were witnessing something extraordinary, a young princess using her influence not to punish or humiliate, but to educate and inspire compassion. Many adults in the crowd found themselves reflecting on their own behavior and how they treated service workers and others in their daily lives. Miss Sarah finally approached, recognizing that the situation had reached a natural conclusion. She was incredibly proud of how Charlotte had handled everything, but she also knew that the growing crowd and attention would soon become overwhelming. The governess caught Charlotte's eye and nodded toward the path they had originally been taking, a gentle reminder of their scheduled activities. Before leaving, Charlotte turned back to the royal guard one final time. She couldn't speak to him directly while he was on duty, but she stood at attention herself and offered him a small, precise salute that she had learned from watching military ceremonies. It was her way of showing respect for his service and acknowledging the dignity he maintained despite the earlier harassment. The guard, though required to keep his eyes forward, could see Charlotte's small figure in his peripheral vision. The sight of the young princess saluting him with such serious respect nearly broke his professional composure. In all his years of service, he had never experienced anything quite like this moment. A member of the royal family, someone he had sworn to protect, had instead chosen to protect him. As Charlotte began to walk away with Miss Sarah, the teenagers called out their thanks and continued apologies. The young princess turned and waved at them with genuine warmth, showing no lingering resentment for their earlier behavior. Her ability to forgive so completely and move forward with such grace left a lasting impression on everyone who witnessed it. News of the incident spread through Windsor Castle with remarkable speed, as stories involving the royal family often do. By lunchtime, virtually every staff member had heard about Princess Charlotte's intervention on behalf of the royal guard. The story grew in the telling, with each person adding their own sense of wonder at the young princess's compassion and courage. Captain Morrison, the head of the Royal Guard unit, was informed of the incident within an hour. As a veteran military officer who had served the crown for over 2 decades, he was deeply moved by what had transpired. He immediately sought out Guard Williams to get a first-hand account of what had happened, and to check on his well-being after the difficult morning. Guard Williams, now off duty and changed into his regular uniform, was still processing the extraordinary experience. "Sir, I've never had anything like that happen before," he told his captain, his voice filled with emotion. "I was prepared to endure another hour of harassment, but then this little girl appeared and just stood up for me. She didn't have to do that. She could have walked by like everyone else." Captain Morrison listened intently, recognizing the profound impact the incident had made on the young soldier. "Princess Charlotte has always shown remarkable character," he replied thoughtfully. "But what she did today goes beyond courtesy or royal protocol. She saw someone in distress and chose to act regardless of the potential consequences to herself." Meanwhile, word of Charlotte's actions had also reached her parents through the inevitable palace communications network. Prince William was in his office reviewing official documents when his private secretary knocked and requested a moment to speak with him. The secretary's expression was one of barely contained pride as he recounted the morning's events in the castle courtyard. Prince William listened with growing amazement as the story unfolded. He knew his daughter was special, but this level of moral courage in such a public setting impressed him deeply. Catherine would want to hear about this immediately, he realized. She had always seen great potential in Charlotte's natural empathy, but this was evidence of something truly remarkable developing in their young daughter. The teenagers involved in the original incident had continued their tour of Windsor Castle, but their experience had been fundamentally changed by their encounter with Princess Charlotte. They found themselves approaching each guard they passed with newfound respect, offering polite nods and genuine smiles. The girl who had cried earlier made a point of thanking every staff member she encountered, from tour guides to maintenance workers. Back in the courtyard, other royal guards had heard about what happened to their colleague. During shift changes, the story was passed along with a mixture of gratitude and admiration for the young princess who had come to their defense. Many of them had endured similar harassment over the years, but none had ever experienced such direct support from a member of the royal family. The incident had also been captured on multiple phones by tourists in the crowd, and videos began appearing on social media within hours. However, rather than focusing on the initial harassment of the guard, the videos highlighted Princess Charlotte's remarkable intervention. Comments poured in from around the world, praising the young royal's compassion and maturity. Miss Sarah, who had witnessed the entire event, knew that she would need to provide a detailed report to the Prince and Princess of Wales. As Charlotte's governess, she was responsible for documenting significant events in the young princess's development. But this was unlike anything she had ever needed to record before. How do you capture in words the moment a child demonstrates such profound moral leadership? Charlotte herself seemed remarkably unaffected by all the attention her actions had generated. When Miss Sarah mentioned that people were calling her brave, the princess looked genuinely puzzled. "I wasn't being brave," she said simply. "I was just being nice to someone who needed help." Isn't that what we're supposed to do? That evening, as the royal family gathered for dinner, Charlotte's actions became the primary topic of conversation. Her younger brother, Prince Louis, listened with wide eyes as the story was retold, while Prince George nodded approvingly at his sister's decisive action. Both boys had always known Charlotte was special, but this confirmed their suspicions that she possessed something extraordinary. Prince William found himself reflecting on his own childhood and wondering if he would have had the courage to confront a group of older children at Charlotte's age. The more he thought about it, the more impressed he became. His daughter hadn't just shown kindness. She had demonstrated leadership, diplomacy, and moral courage that would be admirable in someone 3 times her age. Catherine was particularly moved by Charlotte's natural instinct to protect someone who couldn't protect themselves. As someone who had always championed causes related to mental health and social well-being, she recognized in her daughter a kindred spirit who would likely spend her life advocating for others. The incident suggested that Charlotte's future role in the royal family might involve more than ceremonial duties. Several weeks after the incident, the impact of Princess Charlotte's actions continued to resonate throughout Windsor Castle and beyond. Guard Williams had received commendations from his superiors, not for his handling of the harassment, but for the professional dignity he maintained during such a difficult situation. The recognition felt meaningful to him, partly because he knew it stemmed from Princess Charlotte's intervention, bringing attention to the challenges guards faced daily. Captain Morrison had instituted new protocols for dealing with disruptive tourists, but more importantly, he had arranged for Princess Charlotte to receive an honorary recognition from the Royal Guard Regiment. It was unprecedented for someone so young to be acknowledged in this way, but her actions had earned the genuine respect and gratitude of the entire unit. The ceremony was planned to be small and private, respecting Charlotte's age while acknowledging her remarkable deed. The teenagers who had been involved in the original incident had returned to their respective home countries, but the experience had left a lasting impression on each of them. The girl who had cried reached out through official channels to send Princess Charlotte a handwritten letter of thanks, expressing how the encounter had changed her perspective on treating others with respect. The letter eventually found its way to Charlotte through the proper diplomatic channels. Social media coverage of the incident had evolved from initial news reports into something more significant. Education professionals began using the story as a teaching example in schools around the world, demonstrating how age doesn't determine someone's ability to show moral leadership. The incident became a case study in conflict resolution and standing up for others, inspiring countless discussions in classrooms about courage and compassion. Prince William and Catherine had decided to use the incident as a teaching moment for all their children. They organized a private meeting with Captain Morrison and several royal guards, giving Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis an opportunity to learn more about the important work these soldiers performed. Charlotte listened intently as the guards explained their duties, asking thoughtful questions about their training and responsibilities. During this meeting, Guard Williams was able to personally thank Princess Charlotte for her intervention. The young princess listened to his gratitude with the same serious attention she had shown during the original confrontation. When he finished speaking, she smiled and said simply, "I hope people will be nicer to you now." Her response, characteristically modest and focused on others rather than herself, further impressed the military personnel present. The incident had also caught the attention of King Charles III, who requested a private audience with his granddaughter to hear about the event directly from her. Charlotte approached the meeting with her grandfather with typical composure, recounting the story in her clear, straightforward manner. The king listened with evident pride, recognizing in Charlotte qualities that would serve her well in her future royal duties. What struck King Charles most profoundly was Charlotte's lack of self-consciousness about her actions. She genuinely didn't understand why everyone was making such a big deal about what she considered basic kindness. This humility, combined with her natural instinct to protect others, suggested a young person who would grow into her royal responsibilities with both strength and grace. The story eventually became part of Windsor Castle's unofficial history, passed down among staff members as an example of the royal family's genuine care for those who served them. Tour guides began incorporating Charlotte's intervention into their presentations, though they were careful to focus on the broader message about treating all people with respect rather than sensationalizing the incident. Miss Sarah updated Charlotte's educational records to include a detailed account of the incident and its aftermath, As the princess's governess, she recognized that this event marked a significant milestone in Charlotte's development. The young girl had demonstrated qualities that couldn't be taught in traditional lessons: moral courage, natural leadership, and an intuitive understanding of how to de-escalate conflict through compassion. Years later, when historians would write about Princess Charlotte's childhood, this incident at Windsor Castle would be remembered as one of the defining moments that revealed her character. It demonstrated that even at the age of 8, she possessed an extraordinary combination of empathy, courage, and wisdom that would serve her throughout her life. The royal guard who had been harassed that morning never forgot the small princess who had stood up for him when no one else would. Guard Williams would go on to have a distinguished military career, but he would always remember the day a young royal taught him that true nobility comes not from titles or position, but from the courage to do what's right when others need protection. Princess Charlotte continued her education and royal duties, but those who knew her best could see that the incident had been as formative for her as it had been inspiring for others. She had learned that her voice carried weight, and that she could use her position to make positive changes in the world around her. Most importantly, she had discovered that sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is simply stand up for someone who cannot stand up for themselves.